when we shared our opinions about writing or what art's supposed to do, I realized that this was a drama. This was a 3-act drama in which the first is youth, which is optimistic, very interested in everything, exploring new ideas. The second act is perhaps middle age, what we heard last night, which is full of tension and in a way what sometimes called sort of the middle age crisis in the music. And what made me realize that that was true is that the last fugue in Book 2 is really a deconstruction of a fugue. It's a destruction of a fugue. The remnants of a possible fugue. It's almost like, why go on? Why go on writing fugues? It seems pointless. And then Book 3 for me was that realization that no, it isn't pointless at all. One just has to, in a sense, understand better what it means to oneself, to the person writing it, and to discover that the joys of it are infinite. The possibilities are infinite. And I think that's kind of what happens. So for me, the cycle, the resolution of the cycle is really 33. And 34 is like a postlude. And that's the way I see it.
I agree 100%.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking the exact same thing today.
No, and we did not discuss this, by the way.
We didn't, I swear. And in fact, I was thinking postlude. That's exactly
it's a postlude at the end. And I tend to think musically that all art that is, in my opinion, worthwhile for human life is narrative art. Not that it can be abstract at the same time, it is, but if it doesn't have a basic idea behind it as to why am I writing it, then it becomes very clever, a lot of fun, very enjoyable, but it isn't something that stays with you as a kind of a justification for your life. And I feel that in a way what composers are all out of stride to do is there is a wonderful film by Sam Peckinpah about 2 old cowboys, old lawmen, who are supposed to take care of some rook, bring some gold through and all that. And it's called Ride the Far Country. And at the end, when one sort of becomes tempted by gold, the other one doesn't. And what he says at the end, the one who doesn't, in the end he dies, because usually virtues, one of the problems with virtues is that you can be subject to destruction. He says, all I want to do is enter my house justified. Meaning that by the end of my life, I want to feel that what I have done has been worth my life. And I feel this piece, at the early stage of his life, when he was still in his 30s, does that. And that's why I value this enormously, because for that reason. Do you want to make any?
You're putting a lot of pressure on me.
Why not?
to play it well tonight.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, we're talking about life and death here.
Well, I think important art is about that. Yeah. It really ultimately is about that. It's about how we live.
I would just add that I view Book 3 as being a little bit more out of this earthly world, whether it's in the cosmos or in heaven or whatever, however you want to interpret it. Book 1, as you said, was life, and Book 2 seems like it's very much expressing human emotion, human tragedy, things that are happening to you as a person. And Book 3 seems a little bit more like it's out of the subjective experience. It's from like a bird's eye view.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I would just simply add to that. I completely understand what you're saying, but because of my age now, having lived, I sort of see it as a kind of a peaceful acceptance of what life is. Mm-hmm. What you're saying absolutely makes sense also. There is a lot of that in it. Yeah. Now, there are a couple of things in here that I'm going to ask you about, because the things that were of interest to you. Is you want to talk a little bit about the pedal effects in 26?
26. Which one
It's
is
going
this?
to be
Second one.
the Fugue 26.
Okay, so we actually haven't talked about this yet, but the pedal is extremely important in Bibik's works. Not only this, but also in the piano sonata that I played, and I imagine a lot of his other piano works. And that's quite unusual. It was one of the things that struck me about these pieces. The first thing you learn as a student when you play fugues is take your foot off the pedal and play as cleanly as possible. We have to hear all of the voices. It needs to sound like 4 voices going on at the same time. You have to be a good student. And Bibik just throws all of that away, and oftentimes will tell you to hold the pedal for long, long stretches of time and just letting dissonances and consonances blur together and let clusters remain through for long periods of time. So he's very much interested in using the voices to create something bigger, some sort of coloristic effect out of it. In Fugue 26, he has an interesting idea that I don't think I've ever seen in any other fugue. He has a number of repeated notes on G flat, and then a G flat and G natural, and then G flat, G natural, A flat, a cluster, chromatic cluster, and then you let go of the G flat and you let go of the pedal, and then a beat later you let go of the G, and so you only have the A flat remaining, and again you lift the pedal. So it's like it does the opposite. Instead of adding notes, it subtracts notes, and it really does work. You can hear it each time, and it's just a very curious effect that I haven't heard in fugues. It's very, very creative.
Okay, let's talk about the Prelude to 28,
Okay.
which is that.
Well, maybe I should ask you to talk about the Sphinx idea.
Well, I mean, I don't know how many of you know Schumann's Carnival, but there is a section in there in which there are just, I think, 4 notes only, and they're written kind of almost like a old, ancient Gregorian chant imitation manner, and pianists never know what to do with them, particularly. Most of them leave it out; they just don't bother even playing it. And I found that Sergei Rachmaninov, if you listen to his recording of it, resolves that problem by actually creating a transitional moment in that. You remember that? Yeah. I mean, the question is, why is it? And in a way, for me, and not only, this wasn't original with me, it's like a sphinx. It's a question, why is it there? What does it mean? What is he trying to say with that? It's a puzzle. And if you think of Carnival as the idea of 19th century, Carnival being a comedic examination of life, ironic comedic examination of life. So you have the Commedia dell'arte characters, which symbolize that. And in the 19th century, it became popular again, that idea of Carnival. It became used by Soviet writers under Stalinist period and later as a means also of protest, using the carnival idea of sort of creating a silly character who, like fool in Lear, says some truths. I don't know what you're going to do with that, but well.
I have a funny story, by the way, just relating Sphinx to 20th century music. I saw the pianist Pierre Laurent Aymar play live once, and he had this really interesting program called Collage Montage, in which he took excerpts from various pieces from all different styles, and he kind of threw them together to create his own composition. And what he did was, at one point he wanted to play John Cage, I believe, and right before that he played Schumann's Sphinx, just the Sphinx. And so what he did was he imagined himself playing the notes but didn't play them and just kind of moved around. So it was like he was playing 4 minutes and 33 seconds for Schumann's Sphinx. And the audience was just freaking out. They didn't know what was going on because he's moving around and nothing's happening out of the piano. So it was very comical.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a piece like that, for those of you who are interested in that, by Mayazumi, called Metamusik, in which the players play some notes and others they pretend like they're playing, but nothing comes out. Okay. All right. So, and the fugue there, of course, is also interesting because it's based on the Bach motif, right?
The Bach motif, yeah, sort of.
Sort of, yeah.
The notes he uses are C, B flat, D flat, C flat. So it is a chromatic cluster, but it's one half step off. It really should be B flat, A, C, and C flat. That's a really interesting fugue because it's almost not a fugue at all. It's just one stretto after another. It's one of the shortest fugues in the set, and I believe every single pitch is just the subject in some form. So you can't really say that it has an exposition and an episode or anything like that. It's just one fugue subject on top of each other.
Yeah, the stretto fugue.
Yeah, right.
Okay. What about Prelude 29?
This is interesting. He starts off with a written out trill in the left hand on A flat and B flat, and then when the right hand comes in, it's also on a written out trill on A and B. And then a little bit later, you get mostly black keys in the left hand, while the right hand has mostly white keys. And they're playing very rapidly, very fast, with a lot of pedal. And it reminds me of two pieces. It reminds me of the beginning of Debussy's Fireworks, where he also has black keys with the right hand, white keys, and lots of pedal. And it reminds me of Stravinsky's Petrushka, of course, which does the same effect. So I think he must have had one or both of those composed.
Both of them in mind, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, now, Fugue 32. What do you want to say about that?
Fugue 32. This one is a little bit like the Bach motive once again. We have B flat, C flat, B double flat, he writes it. He doesn't give you the fourth pitch, but the fact that, again, we have that cluster and it's meandering around that B flat, the point being that it's B flat, B, Bach.
Bach, yeah.
I also believe that he had the Bach motive on his mind.
Yeah, I mean, I did talk that with him. I haven't told you that because kind of the point. But I did talk, and I asked him what was his, and he said, actually, if you look at almost every single fugue, someplace there you will find the Bach motif.
In every fugue?
Every fugue. Not necessarily as that, meaning that it is that, but it's kind of hidden between, even the fast passages, it'll be hidden with the way the notes move around. And the reason for that is because you do have a lot in it, the idea of like the Feu d'Artifice. Well, he will play something like a whole tone, B flat, A flat, G flat, and then he'll go to A, G.
Yeah.
And so it circles always around. It's sort of like his way of dealing with that.
It's so common in 20th century music for composers to have an interest in the Bach motive because it's pure chromaticism.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like in Boulez's Second Piano Sonata, right off the bat he quotes the BACH because it fits in the row so easily.
So exactly.
And so many composers, they just can't help themselves because it fits in their language. I would also say the same thing about Shostakovich with the DSCH.
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very closely related. It's also extremely chromatic.
There's one symphony of his that I get kind of tired of it. I'm trying to remember which one where he uses it.
Like 40
Number 10?
times.
Yeah. There are times when listening to that, I said, okay, enough already. But it's brilliant use of it.
Yeah.
And finally, talk a little bit about the last fugue. The thing that ends the whole thing, as you would.
Well,
postlude.
okay.
Why do you think it is a postlude?
The overall general mood of it seems to me to be one of reflection, one of kind of going away from the activity, seeing things from the bird's eye view. It has more of that cosmic feeling to me. And tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm just imagining something, but when I play the prelude to 34, I hear the first piece of George Crumb's Macrocosmos with the repeated notes and with the crescendos and diminuendos. So maybe that's why I hear it in a cosmic way, because I just automatically think of the macrocosmos. And I even hear it a little bit in the fugue too. So was Bibik aware of Crumb's music?
Well, he knew about Crumb, of course.
Because it was written in the 70s at the same time.
I think there are two things for me in here, is that the first part of it is really based on a lamento motif in many ways, because you have all these descending lines, which then becomes changed a little bit. But I have a feeling that since he admired Silvestro very much, and by this time Silvestro had written a number of postludes, so I think he recognized that whole idea of putting a finishing touch. And postlude, Silvestro's idea of postlude was to be a coda. It's always a coda, and I think this really is a coda, which is both success, failure, lament for the fact that it ends, life ends, not too happy about that. And I mean, maybe I'm reading more into it than there is, but the notes tell you that. He's got these.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely has the falling minor seconds everywhere, so it has this feeling of size everywhere.
Yeah, but even he even has the lamento motif where he has F, E flat, D flat, C natural. Yeah, which is a very typical.
Right. What is very interesting about this last one is that he takes that simple lament motive that you're talking about. And in the subject, he, instead of putting them side by side in the same octave, he displaces them. And of course, I couldn't hear it the first time I played it. I had to really analyze the score to figure that out. But it's actually very clear. It's just right there. Yeah. And so he starts expanding the register of the piano, kind of going outwards. It's a little bit like Webern in that way. So it becomes more sparse, maybe even more abstract.
Yeah, more diffused kind of.
Yeah, yeah. And then he throws in these coloristic clusters that go by very quickly, just that just sort of add this atmosphere. And if you analyze those notes, they're also the exact same notes from the subject. So he just uses the same material over and over. And it's quite a short fugue, actually. It simply states the subject, restates it 5 times because it's in 5 voices, and then there's a small little interlude on repeated notes, and then he takes the subject again and displaces it in different octaves, and then there's a little stretto at the end, and then that's it. So it's a very simple way, I think, in a way to end it.
It's sort of, for me, I've contrasted it with the last fugue in Book 2, which for me is, let me explain. For me there, it really is a destruction of the fugue. While in here, it isn't, it's something else. It's a thinking about it and putting it together.
B minor, Book 2, or Book 1?
No, Book 2, the last one, the last fugue, in number. Book 2 would be number 24.
Yeah, B minor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why is that a distraction?
Well, because for me, there is that sort of sense of it kind of dissipating in a way. And I think this one is much more hopeful. The other one is much more depressing. So I think I see that kind of I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, all right, we'll have to talk about that.
Well,
I'm not quite understanding
Okay,
yet,
yeah, too complicated. Okay. I think this will end now.
Okay.
Okay. And I hope that you found our little tete-a-tete helpful in listening. But I want to, at this point, thank wholeheartedly Tim for undertaking this really gigantic project. you have to understand it's close to 3 hours of music by the time you take everything put together. It's a tremendous amount of stuff here, and thoughts in between, and takes years. And the beauty that he also creates with it, I think, is quite remarkable. So, with that, we'll end. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you.
you.